Mortgage Weekly. It is Thursday, the 24th of February. If you can believe that, we're on our last Thursday of February with episode 64. My name is Sam Thompson, and I'm joined with Joe Bladek. How are you doing today, Joe?
Sam, I'm doing real good today, and thanks for the introduction. Really excited to be here on episode 64 on Canadian Mortgage Weekly. And yes, we're in the midst of winter still, and the housing market is still crazy, and really excited to be talking about mortgages with you today, Sam. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing good. It's definitely a bit of a colder snap. We've had some interesting weather this February, some super mild days, some pretty cold days, but we're starting to see, again, I think we chatted about it last week, some of those, new for sale signs in my neighborhood, or those coming soon signs to the lawn. So it looks like, maybe the market's warming up a bit. People are, moving towards
Absolutely.
selling their houses.
Exactly. I've been seeing a lot of those in my neighborhood too, and it's really good to see those because our supply has been so low, and just having more houses available on the market is something what home buyers need right now. So it's nice to see those, but also we're seeing all these houses that are coming up for sale. They are selling really quick as well.
That's right. Yes. And many of them, far over the asking price for sure.
Yeah, definitely far over the asking price. It's been a growing trend here in Canada. Seems like every year buyers are waiting for the market to turn around or soften a little bit. And maybe there is a little bit of a softening, but it just seems to keep shooting upwards these days.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but we have a really excellent episode planned for you all today. I'm really pumped for this episode. We're going to be talking about a lot of the mortgage data that's coming out this week for the bond yield, as well as the new Bank of Canada update meeting. But let's just get into all that today. We're going to take a look at the 5-year bond yield. And we here on Canadian Mortgage Weekly track the bond yield every week just to make sure that we're on top of the trends and watching to make sure how this will affect the mortgage market going forward. And Sam, I know that we've been tracking the bond yield and it's been creeping up a lot lately.
It has been. I know for, looking at it even towards the end of January, maybe mid-January, we had seen it into a spike, but it was sitting in a range of 60%, 1.6 to 1.7. But lately we've seen it increase that range by 0.1%, and we're seeing it now, the low, it's bottoming out at 1.7%, and today we're at the upper range of 1.8%. So it hasn't necessarily broken past that 1.8, but we are seeing, that tight range. As you can see in the graph here, there's been some dips and valleys, but overall it's staying consistent in that range.
Definitely some dips and valleys, but yes, I can see the tightening there. And we have had some market news recently with what's happening internationally as well as nationally, just affect the yield a little bit. But as we are moving towards the Bank of Canada announcement, it always seems to do a little bit of a tightening before that announcement does come out. But it is a sign of things to come that we have surpassed all the previous highs of the last year at this point, and could be a sign of things to come. Let's take a look at the CDOR rate right now as we launch into that. We track this on Canadian Mortgage Weekly as well. Looks like the CDOR rate is at 0.672%, up from last week at 0.672%, up from 0.62. It's hard to say that sometimes, a little bit of a tongue twister.
Yeah. It definitely has been, slowly climbing as well. That variance from prime, keeps increasing, and, creeping forward little by little. It seems like very small shifts, but when we've been looking at it week over week, I'd say for almost at least the last month, we've been seeing that slow increase. Again, as you're saying, leading into the Bank of Canada announcement, it could be a bit of signs towards a potential increase, but I guess we'll have to see what happens next Wednesday.
We definitely have to see what happens next Wednesday, Sam. Yes. And, next Wednesday, we have a special episode planned for that. It'll be episode 65, where we'll be covering live coverage on Canadian Mortgage Weekly of the Bank of Canada rate announcement. It will start at 10 a.m. And it'll be on March the 2nd. We'll start with a pre-rate show where we'll talk about the previous history of rate announcements and previous increases, previous decreases. But looking forward to seeing what the Bank of Canada comes up with, because we are seeing that, even though the overnight rate has been held at 0.25% now for quite some time, there's a growing consensus that the rate will move this announcement.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting one to watch, because I know that, we had articles stacked up thinking that, the rate has to increase at the last rate announcement in January, but you know what, it stayed the same. And we're at almost the 2-year mark from when it first hit its low of 0.25%. So it'll be very interesting to see, where that ends off. And I think, from some of our websites that we get our mortgage data from, they have some pretty interesting forecasts for the upcoming announcement. Hey, Joe?
That's right. Yeah, we get a lot of our data from mortgagedashboard.ca, which is a fantastic website if anyone is ever interested in getting mortgage data in real time. But yeah, there looks like their chance of a rate hike forecast for the next meeting, sort of like a rain forecast for weather, but in this case, it's a rate hike forecast. We're looking at a 139% chance of a rate hike on March the 2nd.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know how they come up with that number. It's very interesting. So moving on to the Canadian house price average, which we also track here on Canadian Mortgage Weekly. As we know that mortgages are closely related to the house prices, it has been also creeping up, Sam. And we've seen that we have a year-over-year increase now. Well, first of all, the national house price for January remains at $748,450, which is a quite high number. I think we've exceeded all prior highs at this point as well, which is interesting because the annual household income to afford a house now at the average price level is $156,000 per year. So that's quite a high household income.
It definitely seems, higher than most average household incomes that we see come into the office. I know that, it's a pretty high mark to achieve for sure.
Yeah, it's hard for two people or one or two people to come up with that income. And we'll cover that a little bit later in our episode as we get into our topic. But in this case, we've seen a year-over-year increase of house prices of 21.9%, which is a fantastic investment for anyone who did buy in January of last year. So if you are in that pool, congrats to you. You probably have made money on your home investment. Mm-hmm. And looking forward, it's hard to say what's going to happen in 2022, but we will be tracking February's data as it comes out in March.
Yes, I think we'll likely have that information within a few weeks. I know typically the CREA releases it maybe halfway through the following month. So hopefully in a couple of weeks, we'll get the data on February. I know it was, actually a little bit of a slower January this year than it was last year. So it's interesting to see that, mirrored with higher home prices, bit of a slower market, maybe some lower inventory.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of lower inventory, that brings me into our topic today, because that's really been affecting house prices and, just first-time home buyers in general. And our topic today on Canadian Mortgage Weekly is that Canada's first-time home buyer, as we know it traditionally, is unfortunately dead. And Sam, as you've seen, we've had to turn away buyers this year that have had great credit, no debts, and good income.
Yeah, it's right. Even doing a lot of the first-time buyers webinar, we've seen a lot of strategy shift because, as you're saying, we have had lots of clients coming to us, that they followed the steps correctly. They've been saving for a down payment. They have dual income. They're looking to buy, even if they're looking to, purchase more of a modest home for a starter home. when the average house price is 748,000, even though starter homes are quite expensive for a lot of their incomes.
Exactly. And where we are in Ontario too, another point to consider is that an average home price that's across nationally. There are cities that are lower, there are cities that are higher. And if you're looking in Toronto or in around Toronto, Barrie, where we are located, Aurelia, I think that it seems that we are a little bit higher than the national house price average, which just seems to make things a little bit harder and worse. Yeah.
It's true. We definitely have that, almost a bit of inflation from Toronto that,
Yeah.
everybody in Toronto was moving out due to COVID. So the surrounding areas saw, that surge in house prices. But as we had mentioned, with the average house price at, 749,000 approximately, again, meaning that the household income average has to start at 156,000, and it also means even the minimum down payment is just shy of $50,000 as a minimum down payment for first-time buyers. That is, quite an obstacle to have to achieve, right?
It really is. I remember being a first-time home buyer years ago, Sam, and it was hard enough to come up with the 5% down minimum required, but it was nowhere near $50,000. And the home I was buying for my first home was nowhere near 748,000 or $750,000, and my income was nowhere near $156,000 at all.
Mhm.
It makes me feel a little bit concerned because when you look at the single parent or individual first-time home buyer, they are pretty much excluded now from getting into the market whatsoever. They need another person to buy with them, which we'll talk about in a little bit here, just to add on to that income, because the income is just not enough to support even the most modest houses these days.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the driving factors for the house price average being pushed so high is, just as we had mentioned, that there's no inventory, or again, exceptionally low inventory. By the end of January, the CREA had reported that we were only at about 1.5 months of inventory, when typically they like to see that at about a 5 month standard. So the fact that we're operating at under half of what's considered, a healthy market is really, again, making it that much more challenging for all these first-time home buyers, is that there's no houses on the market to even purchase.
There really isn't. And it's making it really difficult too, that the houses that are coming on the market seem to be priced in the range of $1 million+ at this point. We are seeing detached homes that are used to be starter homes selling for $800,000, $900,000, which is quite high, and they're snapped up very quickly. So yes, the inventory has been a very, very big concern. I know that Canada does have plans for more inventory, but it's just not happening quick enough, and it's not happening because there's supply issues with materials. Builders are behind. There's a lot of red tape just to start builds, and even if we are able to bring in all these new homes, it's still not going to meet the hefty demand that we are seeing just in Canada. So there's another option too. Like, there's some new units that builders are coming out with, but we're also seeing issues with those, Sam, as well. There's a lot of new units. We had a client actually contact us. They are a buyer looking to get into one of these new condo units that are being built by builders. Specifically, they are very small and they're very affordable. However, Sam, we're noticing that there's a lot of issues getting mortgages on them.
Yeah, absolutely. The size of these units is a very important factor when we're chatting with the lender, confirming guidelines for the properties that they can get mortgages on. And it does seem like a lot of these units are a bit too small for lenders' guidelines, and we can't even do the deal. I know that we've seen a shift where first-time buyers who maybe could still get in, like we're saying, to those fully detached starter homes are shifting to, a realization that they'll have to start with a condo because typically it's a softer market. But if we're seeing that units maybe don't even meet the requirements from lenders, the only people that can buy those condos are investors, just adding to, a new generation of permanent renters, it seems.
Exactly. It really encourages that permanent renter generation or the renter economy. I
Mhm.
find just by creating these units that are very affordable, but at the same time, very small. And in turn, lenders can't finance them. So it's only really, like you're saying, Sam, investors that can buy them and then turn around and rent them out. So the solutions that are being brought out, they just are not seeming to satisfy the current issue that we are dealing with. And there's another issue that we're dealing with, and it's an issue on one side, but it's also a very good thing for Canada on the other side, and that is the fact that our country is very pro-immigration, and we have a very high immigration goal target for 2022. For 2022, we are showing that Canada does want to bring in 431,645 individuals into Canada, and that will just add additional demand into the housing market.
Yeah, it definitely will. And especially, in most cases, we're seeing, they're coming from, possibly wealthier countries as well, where, they have more savings than, a typical Canadian wanting to get into that first time buyer market. We've seen, some clients and had been chatting with some, immigration lawyers where some of them are coming with hundreds of thousands of dollars in their savings accounts. So, of course they can make a higher offer, and their mortgage qualification is higher than a lot of current Canadian citizens trying to get into the market.
It really is. Yeah. We have the whole family coming on title at times, whereas in Canada, it's typically husband, like two spouses going on title, where with a family going on title, you have the mother, the father, and maybe the daughter and the son. They're all adult of age and they're all working, and they're all going on the mortgage application like it's a normal thing. And they have the income because it's easy to hit that target of 156,000 a year when you have 4 people together, but it's just really hard to do it with 1 or 2 people.
Exactly, yeah. And that actually leans in well to some of the leveraging strategies that we're going to cover off in today's video. That the traditional first-time homebuyer is dead, sorry, but there is a couple of options and strategies of how to leverage the market, and probably the most efficient method, if I can say that, would be by adding a temporary cosigner. Adding a friend or family member to the title can definitely boost your qualifying amount. I think we usually see that as the biggest bang for your buck when, even considering paying down some debts or saving a higher down payment. To get in the market sooner, cosigner is almost always the best option.
Yes, it really is. It does add so much to your mortgage application strength. It can really get you into the market immediately. And then down the road, we can remove the cosigner 1, 2, or 3 years in. And at that time, your property has increased in value. Perhaps you've gotten a few raises, and maybe even your credit has gotten better and you've paid off some debt. So your whole financial situation can change very dramatically, and we can remove that cosigner easily in just a few years. Yeah. And also, if you're looking at cosigners, don't forget to ask family. You can ask not only your mother and father, but also grandparents or brothers and sisters, specifically grandparents. If they are on a pension income, we are able to use CPP income, Canada Pension Plan. We are able to use old age security income, which is a Canadian income for seniors. And if there's any pension income coming from a workplace pension, we're able to accept that as a cosigner income.
Yeah, it's definitely, there's a lot of options for adding that cosigner to your mortgage to help strengthen your file. And as we had mentioned with our first issue of just house prices being so much higher than, a lot of new families or first-time buyers, total household income, we can look at adding some additional incomes. Now, we had done a previous video this month on some unique and interesting ways to get into the market. And hey, sometimes adding that extra side hustle income can help you qualify for more just by having that additional annual income added to your file.
Exactly, Sam. And we're seeing this is becoming an absolute need for any folks that are, just the two partners going on title. They don't need just two jobs. You need two jobs and a side hustle.
Mm-hmm.
And keep in mind that if you have a side hustle like DoorDash or Uber Eats, or you're running your own business, perhaps you have a side Etsy account or something like that where you're earning an annual income from, the lender will require 2 years history. So make sure you claim your income on your tax documents and keep those aside for when you come to qualify for your mortgage. There are alternative lending strategies available, Sam, which we also have access to. They typically require 6 months bank statements in that case, but they typically also require a higher down payment as well.
That's right.
Yeah. But very, very awesome leveraging strategies here just to get anyone who's looking to get a home this year into the market. So far, we've covered adding a temporary cosigner, adding a side hustle for some extra income. And then there's also a third option, Sam, and that's adding rental income.
Yeah, so this is a definitely an attractive option, I guess you could say, for a lot of first-time buyers. If you're able to purchase a duplex and it has an additional units, or hey, maybe it's a triplex and it has 2 units that have rental income, we can actually use some of that rental income to add to your gross income. So it can help you qualify for that higher price point because you're able to use some of the income you'll be receiving in rent towards, increasing that household income closer to that, 154,000 a year mark.
Exactly. Any lenders that you well, in terms of lenders, we have many lenders that will be able to use that rental income. And in terms of if you've approached your lender or your bank yourself and they have run the numbers for you with rental income, it's good also to talk to a mortgage professional, because we have other lenders that are able to calculate rental incomes in various different ways. And we find that running the numbers with every single lender produces a different result. So we want to make sure that we run the numbers specifically for you to make sure we give you the best result with the rental income, because that can vary lender to lender.
Yeah, that's right. And it also can help increase the cash flow of the homeowner. As you're receiving that rental income, it can help offset maybe mortgage payments or upkeep for those rental units. I know everybody's dream landlord scenario is that nothing goes wrong in your unit, your tenants are perfect, but hey, that extra cash flow, those rent payments can definitely help the upkeep with keeping those tenants.
It definitely would be the landlord's dream not to have any issues or problems happen, but there always seems to be an issue once in a while that creeps up. Maybe a furnace needs to be repaired, or maybe a roof needs to be replaced. Things like that do creep up that as a landlord you need to budget for. So yes, cash flow can be a very coveted thing when you have a rental property, just to be able to set aside that cash flow for the upgrades and upkeep of the property. Yeah. So that concludes our leveraging strategies: adding a cosigner, adding a side hustle income, and using also rental income when purchasing a home as a first-time buyer. Sam, thank you so much for putting this information together today. And just for all of you who don't know Sam Thompson is a mortgage professional in the Barrie area, originally from Ottawa, Ontario. He's been with Mega Mortgage, powered by Lend at Ease, now for 2 years as of this week. So that's fantastic. Congratulations.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so great to have you on the show. And always great to hear your stories with Milo, your pup there. And it's good to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's was a good topic to chat through, and I'm glad that we could discuss this information. And yes, just matched the 2 year mark, so that's exciting as well. And again, those whole 2 years have been spent with Joe and Terry Lynn at our team. And for anybody who doesn't know Joe, Joe has been in the industry for almost 11 and a half years now that we're looking at it. So definitely lots of years in the industry. He's a mortgage broker living up in Aurelia with his wife and 2 kids. So again, thank you for having me on the show and being part of it to share some of your insight into all these talking points.
Very much, Sam. Yes, and we're always excited here on Canadian Mortgage Weekly, covering all these data points for mortgage and real estate news. Join us next week for a special episode on Wednesday the 2nd, where Sam and I will be doing live coverage for the Bank of Canada rate announcement. We're starting at 10 a.m. And Sam, it'll be great because we'll be covering some past history as well as the current rate announcement. It should be a good one. And then we have a regularly scheduled program on Thursday at 11:30 for our episode with our special guest.
Yeah, it's going to be an awesome week ahead. It's definitely, going to be videos that you're going to want to catch and see our coverage for.
Absolutely. And the last thing I almost forgot to mention again, I keep forgetting to mention it, but I am doing a charity online virtual concert on Sunday, February 27th for the Canadian Congenital Heart Alliance. You can check them out on Facebook. And if you are interested, you can also donate to them. They support research for congenital heart disease, which I was born with. And it's great to be able to be part of that. And I'm looking forward to it. And, if you're not doing anything on Sunday, which a lot of people are still staying in these days, feel free to check that out on Facebook and look forward to seeing you there. And thanks for joining us today, everyone, for Canadian Mortgage Weekly, Canada's video Mortgage Weekly news podcast. And we'll see you next week.